And we are live.
Yay.
Yes, we made it. All right, welcome to my page for those of you who are tuning in. I'm Jayne and I am here today to talk about holiday Gothics. Yes, it is a thing with an expert on Gothics and horror and other things in that sort of genre, Agatha Andrews of the She Wore Black podcast. This is a really fascinating podcast for those of us who love that suspense on the edge kind of thing. And so before we start, or let's start with, tell us about the podcast first and why you even started it up. What appealed to
Okay.
you?
Well, thank you so much for having me. You know, it's always a treat for me to be able to chat with you. You're so much fun. But I was a librarian for many, many years. And basically, when I needed to stay home with my child, I wanted to do an extension of the work I was doing in libraries by connecting books to readers. And my personal passion has always been Gothic romance, mystery horror, like, anything with atmosphere.
Yeah,
And so that's why I started doing it. I've always done it in one form or another. I mean, a long time ago, I had a public access TV show back when those were real things. It's just an extension of that library work, which I think you and I both have in common. So,
yeah. Well, today we decided to focus on 10 books that have a holiday Gothic twist. And I didn't even know that was a subgenre or a category. So, so start talking to us about holiday Gothics because it sounds fascinating.
it's so much fun. And one of the things that we don't really think about is that our most quintessential Christmas story is a Gothic, which would be A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I mean, whether you know it because of the Muppets or whether you know it because you've read the story, it is one of those things that's such a part of our subconscious that it's in television commercials. And like I said, the Muppets, I mean, even children know what this story is if they haven't read it. And so, but it is a story where a man is visited by three ghosts. He's questioning his sanity as he reflects on his life.
Right?
There's a deep sense of isolation. Every major Gothic trope you can find in a Christmas story, but we don't really think about it as a Gothic, but it completely is. So that's always the first one that I talk about.
Okay. The
Yeah.
classic, the classic.
Yes. And another story that's a classic that people don't really think of as, and understandably so, as a Christmas story would be Turn of the Screw. I have that also by Henry James, because we think of that as a story of a governess with creepy kids, and ghosts lurking everywhere. But it's told in the framework of a man sitting by the fire at Christmas, talking to his family about an experience that he had. And this is something that was a very Victorian Gothic tradition. Christmas ghost stories. And so, what we wind up doing, because it's told in the context from beginning to end of a man telling a story at Christmas, we then experience this ghost story as Victorians would have experienced the Victorian ghost story tradition of, everyone gather around and we're going to tell a spooky ghost story at, like, by the Christmas tree. And so we then experience it as the Victorians would have it at the holiday season. So it's something that people don't associate with Christmas, but it completely is. So Turn of,
Fascinating.
yeah, by Henry James. So um, and the Brits lead me into the next one as well, which is the Winter Spirits, and I'm going to do kind of two at the same time for you, Jane. The Winter Spirits, Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights, and the Haunting Season, because these are both done by the same group of people. What they've done is they've taken the most popular British Gothic authors today, and they've all written Christmas
Huh.
slash Yuletide stories, and put them together in both of these anthologies. And so, what's really excellent about that is that you can kind of read one every night for, like, through the holiday season.
Okay, okay.
And so that's so much fun. So if you love, like, Laura Purcell, who wrote The Silent Companions, or Bridget Collins, who wrote The Binding, and Jess Kidd, and lots of other folks that are really, really popular, Gothic, British Gothic writers. You can read, you don't have to go all the way back to the Victorians if you don't want to. You can read, you can read newer writers.
So what are the two titles again, just to get them,
Yeah, The
The
Haunting
Haunting
Season
Season, Haunting
and
Season, and the other one was,
The Winter Spirits, Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights.
got it. Okay.
Yeah, but speaking of anthologies, I'm going to go back to the Victorians. I'm putting the books down. I apologize every time I talk about one. But there's a collection of books called the Valancourt Book of Victorian Christmas Ghost Stories. Now, I've ordered them. I just don't have them yet because I've been eyeballing them for like 3 years, Jane. And I finally just broke down and ordered them because they have great covers. They're kind of these adorable, like a candlestick with a skull, and stuff like that. But they're cartoonish, so they're kind of cute too. But what these are, going back to the Victorians, are collections. The Charles Dickens wrote his famous stories, all of his famous stories, as serials in newspapers, and a lot of times short stories were also published in newspapers. And so what they've done is they took collections of many, many Victorian ghost stories that were published in Victorian times and have put them together in these collections, in these Valancourt collections.
Ah,
So
ah,
yeah, so you're not just getting Dickens, you're getting all kinds of people that have kind of been lost in literary history, but were very popular ghost story writers. And these are their Christmas ghost stories that were published, 150 years ago. So those are the Valancourt Book of Victorian Ghost Christmas Ghost Stories.
okay.
So I apologize for that. I didn't get them in the mail in time, but they're on the way.
Okay.
The next one I have for you, I don't also have a hard copy of, but I know that you will know this author, which is Gregory Maguire. He wrote Wicked. So if any of y'all know and love Wicked, which is a big movie right now,
Yeah.
you'll also be familiar with the fact that he writes retellings, fairy tale retellings. What's interesting about him is the way that he also incorporates a very real element of something that happened historically. So it is honestly more of a mixture of historical fiction with some magical elements than things that are just mired in the fantasy. um and so with Hidden Sea, it's the story of the Nutcracker and his sinister maker. And it's in the Bavarian Black Forest. You're steeped in German romanticism, cults that are obsessed with the afterlife. And so here's your ghost stories, your Gothic elements here. I mean, Black Forest in and of itself. I mean, you know. So yeah, you're kind of in German romanticism is very Gothic. And so Hidden Sea in the story of the Nutcracker, you get both this fantastical element of that kind of sinister magic, but then something that's very like the first thing you think of when you think of Gothic. So as far as setting goes,
Okay, so that's McGuire,
Hidden Sea. Yes.
Hidden Sea, Hidden Sea. Okay.
HIDD, like hidden, ENCEE,
Okay.
SEE. Sorry. So I wish I had the cover for you. Um, are you ready for the next one?
Yes.
Because I do
Go.
have a cover for the next one.
Okay. Go, go, go.
Yay, the Kingdom of Sweets. And so this is another Nutcracker retelling, but we get a different point of view here. This is the story of the girls. Well, Clara, but she's also got a sister that we never know about or hear about because Clara gets all the attention. She's the golden child. She gets all of the fun, all the beauty, she lives the golden life. And this other sister lives in the shadows. She doesn't always like being in the shadows. And so she seeks out something else and comes across basically an alternate universe with the sugar plum fairy.
Oh,
But are all things that sparkle really like, are they really that sparkly, happy place? We might have a sinister sugar plum fairy, is all I'm saying. So, it might be. darker than we'd imagine with all that sparkle and glitter. So The Kingdom of Sweets by Erica Johansson, if anybody's interested, will give you a different Nutcracker retelling with the sinister sugar plum fairy. I love it. That was all I needed to know. But then I saw that it's about sisters and all of that, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be so good. So I haven't read this one yet, but I do have it. So
Okay.
um the next one is a guest that I'm going to have on my show soon. This is Grim Curiosities by Sharon Lynn Fisher. I don't know if y'all can see it. It's brand new. This just came out. And so she wrote Salt and Broom. If any of you all remember that story, that is a witch retelling of Jane Eyre, and it was excellent. And so I've only started reading this a couple of days ago. And it's already every bit as charming and fun as Salt and Broom was. So I'm so excited to keep going with this one. But this one has a curiosity shop. Jane, I'm here for a curiosity shop. And
Everybody loves them. Everybody loves them.
absolutely. And it's 1851 York. And she has to take over this curiosity shop from her father. And her mother has always had the ability to see ghosts. So people would come to her to sort of seance to a for a former loved one, but she's lost her ability to connect with them and has fallen like extremely ill. There's somebody else, the local milord, if you will, has a sister with the same condition who had that same ability. And it turns out that the answer to this ghostly problem is found in this very rare set of books she has in her curiosity shop that
Uh-huh.
are about old Yuletide myths and folklore. So it's seeped in Yuletide, it's seeped in all the Victorian atmosphere that you could want. You've got ghosts, you've got all the things that Victorians were interested in with that. And again, Sharon's got such a fun voice. I mean, it's like that she, I don't know how she does this, but she manages to write spooky things in a cozy way. So, I
That's
mean,
a that's a knack. It's a trick.
I don't know how she does it, but it
It's
works.
a
And
talent. It's a talent.
I remember someone saying it's a witchy retelling of Jane Eyre, her other book, but it's cozy. And I'm like, no, but it was. So, so anyway, she'll be on the show soon. If y'all want to tune in to have some insight from the author on that, you can tune into that soon too. Are you ready for number 9? I'm plowing through these pretty quickly. Um, Again, I don't have this book, but I only need to say the name Anne Rice for y'all to know who it is. Anne Rice has enough of a reputation where I think you'll be interested, even if I don't have the book in hand. But it's The Wolves of Midwinter. So this is part of a different shifter series for her, and this is where the main character is dealing with a midwinter festival and organizing it. And it takes place in a forest. Now, in his castle, he's distracted by this tormented ghost who is part of a group of spirits called the Ageless Ones. And so, I think that in the context of what we know about the way Anne Rice writes, like if you're interested in all the like, the Ageless Ones, tormented ghosts in a forest, in a midwinter festival, that's all you need to know about the Wolves of Midwinter by Anne
Okay.
Rice. So, and my final one I have for you is My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon. And now she is very known in the horror community for writing excellent ghost stories. If you're fans of like Simone St. James, who's also known for writing excellent ghost stories, Jennifer McMahon is every bit as reliable in that department. And this is one where the main character's mother, like the main character is living a happy life with her kids, her family, but her mother, who she had a very tumultuous relationship with, has fallen very ill and has asked her like for a final chance at reconciliation. And so her and her family go to her mother's house. And while she's there, some very ghostly, very sinister things start revealing themselves, which may have something to do with her mother's behavior. And then it becomes a question of, well, what do I do to keep my family safe in this situation, get out of it, et cetera, et cetera. So she's a usually writes stories that take place in Vermont. So if you like the New England feel and the aesthetic of that as well, Jennifer McMahon is definitely someone you should check out for creepy ghost stories at Christmas.
Okay. And that's
Um,
your,
and that's my 10, but I did, if you don't mind, I'd love to shout out a book I have or an author I have coming on the show who's
yes.
Gothic adjacent. So, and I say Gothic adjacent because a lot of times historical fiction, the setting will work for a lot of Gothic fans because it's still creepy castles, it's still dark historical times. But Stephanie Barron is going to be on my show. She also writes as Francine Matthews. And this is her 12 days of Jayne and the 12 Days of Christmas. Basically, this series is Jane Austen as a detective. And so she's going to be on the show to talk about Christmas mysteries if anybody's interested in tuning in for that later on.
And the show is She Wore Black podcast.
Yes.
And you can find you on the socials.
At Instagram, I've just plopped onto Blue Sky. Everyone's fled Twitter. So now I'm there at Blue Sky, but I'm there as Agatha Andrews, not as She Wore Black. And then I'm also on Threads as She Wore Black and Facebook. So.
All right, now we get to talk about you because you confided in me and I'm blabbing it to the world
That's
here
okay.
with your permission that you have written your own
Yes,
book. And it, first of all, is it Gothic? Is it horror? Is it in the genre you love so much?
it is. It's gothic, but it's gothic with like a cozy horror thing. It's haunted dolls. It is a grief novel, but done through haunted dolls. But so haunted dolls might scare a lot of people, but mine like to eat quiche and berries and there's an adorable lavender colored pickup truck, and you know, I tried my best to honor grief and my experience with grief through it, and I think that dolls were a really great avenue for that. These dolls also have cat heads and human bodies. It's like so I tried to make them cute despite the fact that they're frightening. Um, it's a mix.
It's
It's a
mixed.
mix. Yes, and I'll be going out on submission very soon for that.
Oh,
So
well, all the best.
thank
I'll
you.
look forward to reading it when it comes out.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Let's talk a bit about, I'm curious about the connection between Gothic and Victorian. Where do you think that came from? That I hadn't, until you just started talking about it today, I hadn't even, I mean, like you said, we all know the stories, or at least some of them, but I didn't realize it was such a tradition.
They
Uh,
were obsessed with ghosts. They were obsessed with seances and fortune telling and the occult. And it was just something that was very much a part of their culture. And I think that happens a lot because this is also things that happened after each of the major world wars too, that they found this interest in the occult. Because when there's death on such a big scale, that that's just something that becomes popular as people try to make connections. And so I think it was just something like ladies in society would have seances. They were just so interested in this.
I get the seance thing because
Yeah.
I'm just, what's curious to me is the association with Christmas, the tradition of
I
lining
That's a
up.
great question. So I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the in winter, especially in those climates for the Victorians, like when we think of Victorian England, and even New England, it's cold. You're locked in. It's, you hear sounds outside of like whistling wind, and cold is often associated with ghosts. And there, you try to stay warm by the fire. There's darkness that's
Yeah,
most
yeah,
of the day is dark. There's everything sets you up. And so then you can get cabin fever, and which is that whole idea of questioning your sanity. And then if you have like a dependence on staying warm for things like tea, is the tea poisoned? Like everything that you can interject in traditional Gothic novels is amplified. I think especially at Christmas time when you're usually locked in, you're either very alone or you're surrounded by people who are driving you nuts. And so it's always one extreme or the other. And I think when you're cold, like everything is just you're hypersensitive to all of these things.
yeah.
So
That makes a lot of sense. And humans basically deal with those kinds of fears by telling stories about them. So
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. It's interesting that the ghost story stands alone. People who won't read other kinds of supernatural or um, horror or those other elements, most people will listen to a ghost story.
I
That
think I think
has
that's
its own.
true. Yeah, I think that's true because I think the human nature of a ghost is so relatable because a monster is a monster and there's an inhumanity to
Yeah,
monsters that is
yeah.
unrelatable in a way that a ghost was a person and still is dealing with human emotions
Good
and
point. Excellent.
yeah, and
Yeah,
human thoughts. So I think we can connect to those regardless.
yeah. And we do grow up with them. Ghost stories are from childhood. The other thing that's fascinating to me too, and you mentioned it a couple of times in looking at this Gothic genre and well, horror, whatever, all in that world, um, is the emphasis on retelling
Mm,
traditional stories. Fiction, I've been writing fiction for a long time now, and there are no new plots. There are no new. I mean, we're all dealing with human emotions, and the human emotions have not changed. They are what they are. Um, so, in a sense, we're always retelling something, but in particular, the emphasis on retelling fairy tales
mm.
is in your genre, or that this horror genre has become a real thing. And I find that fascinating, and I'm wondering, does it have its own category? As when people who read in this genre, are they looking for that? Do they go looking for that particular subcategory?
Absolutely, absolutely. And especially because a lot of times our sensibilities change. So right now, a lot of people are doing like feminist retellings of things, whether it's Madeline Miller and Circe, or something that's a retelling of a fairy tale. A lot of times they'll focus on the witch because witches have a lot to do also with agency, female agency
Yes, yes.
and empowerment. And so what we wind up seeing a lot right now with fairy tale retellings are stories that have a witch or a crone of some sort. And so they retell the story either of a misunderstood villain or someone who maybe looked helpless but finding her power. And so it's fascinating to watch, but a lot of that has to do with our changing sensibilities culturally. So people want to
Interesting,
yeah, find
interesting.
new
And
ways.
well, the whole witch thing was huge in the past 5 years,
Yes.
because that's power.
Yeah.
Witches are.
I love like Circe's a great example. I mean, that's a Greek myth, but she's a Greek character. That's a witch. It's a witch story when you look at it. And so and most of the story is about her finding her power through her witchcraft that's more powerful than the gods. And it's like, oh, give me more of those, but ghosts are interesting because you have no power over a ghost, really. And then, and in my story, one of my characters tries very hard to either empower a ghost by sort of trying to contain them in a doll, or she tries to seek vengeance on a ghost by trying to contain it in a doll. And you just can't control a ghost, you know?
And I think the other thing about ghosts is that they're tied, they're trapped because of some human emotion, that something, for some human reason, they're trapped and they can't move on. There's that
Unfinished business.
unfinished business here on earth. And in a lot of the stories, that's the whole thing. You free the ghost
Yeah.
is is how you escape the problem. You find the freedom for the ghost, which
One of the things that I think is fascinating about your books, Jane, is that I have read like With This Ring has a character who writes horrid novels. And so who is very much aware of this long tradition of all of these things back in her time frame. And so, I mean, anybody who's watching that is one of my favorites ever of all time. So,
one of the things that I discovered when I was for those of you who are watching, I wrote that as Amanda Quick, and it's set in a Regency time period. And the Regency and the Victorian time periods were a flourishing time for a lot of women writers, because women writers were felt the critics generally agreed that they were better at writing the whole Gothic genre. They just had whatever.
Yeah.
Women were just better at it, and there were a lot of them whose names are lost to us today, of course, because that's how the American canon and the British canon suddenly skewed male. But there were a lot of fiction writers in the 1900s, and they were women, and they were writing Gothic and the paranormal, and it was just a very rich kind of time for them. They built up all the tropes
Yeah.
during that time period. The one we may have added in the 20th century maybe is the am I going crazy thing.
Hmm.
That became more of an emphasis, I think, in 20th and now the 21st century Gothic, is that real question of the gaslight
The
story.
sanity, yes. Well, and so one of the reasons when I recommended on, earlier, the Valancourt books of Victorian Christmas ghost stories, a lot of those that I was interested in are women writers. So it's like they went in and found some of these forgotten writers writing these ghost stories. So I can't wait to get mine in the mail because I'm so excited to read these.
Yeah, no, they were there. They were published and they were popular, but they just kind of got lost in the history of the literature, and the genre itself didn't get a lot of respect.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Something that sticks in my craw about Little Women is how Professor Bear ridicules Joe March for wanting to write these genre novels. And as someone who loves this genre, I think that's perfectly fine. And she did not need to be criticized for that. But she was representative of so many women writers who were writing scary stories at that time and making good money from it.
Well, the thing about genre is anybody. I was in a here's the story. I was in a group once, standing in a group at a cocktail reception, and there was me, romantic suspense. There was a science fiction writer. There was a straight up mystery writer, and a couple of one Western writer, and somebody else who was doing straight up kind of thriller sort of things. And everyone had the same complaint. My genre doesn't get any respect. It was like,
For real, though.
and we've always had this thing about popular fiction as being somehow a lesser form of writing than literary fiction, when in fact literary fiction is another genre,
Yes.
and it's got its own rules and conventions. And if you violate those rules and conventions, you're kicked out of the genre. It's very strict, actually,
Yes.
about
Yeah.
what qualifies, and the people who write it are very aware of what they're doing, just like the people who write any other genre know what they're doing, and they know what the point of the story has to be, what the emphasis has to be. And the jobs are different. The job of the point of a literary novel is a different project than the point of a genre novel. Genre novels are much more, we call them stories, but they're really moralities plays. They have a sense of right and wrong, and they reinforce a lot of the traditional virtues, and a lot of the traditional. We all know what a hero is supposed to do when the chips are
Right.
down, and we know that from genre fiction. We know what a hero is,
Hmm.
and that comes from some storytelling.
And it's also like so engaging, and I feel like anybody that connects to literature and is fully invested, is fully engaged, is not wasting their time. And these are great books. As we were talking about, they all just have their own conventions and their own rules. And it's funny, once I heard someone tell me, who's now a very posh literary professor, he once told me that Stephen King wrote The Shawshank Redemption and Stand By Me to prove he could write. And I'm like, he's always known. He's never lacked the confidence of being a good writer. You know, has nothing to do with it. Those were just stories he wanted to tell, and that's it. He wasn't trying to prove anything. So,
What's to prove? No, that's that. It's well, there has always been that friction between what gets qualified as literary and what gets qualified as genre fiction. And we are firmly on the side of genre fiction.
I appreciate you being interested in wanting to talk about ghost stories and Gothic. It just pleases me so much because I love your romantic suspense, and I feel
Oh,
like they share worlds, like they share so much. So thank you so much for being willing and interested in talking about this.
well, you and I always have a good conversation, and I want to thank you for taking time to come on the show, my program today, or my page, or whatever, and to educate us a bit about the importance of the Gothic tradition and associated with the holidays. I think that's just fascinating. So,
Anytime, Jane.
and once again, my guest today, Agatha Andrews from the She Wore Black podcast, and you can find her online. And the podcasts are all your favorite authors.
Oh, I think so. They're mine. Thank you so
All
much.
right, bye bye, and happy
Bye.
holidays.
Yes.